Open this door right now, Claire!
My name is Claire Mercer.
And this is how my marriage ended.
The night my husband tried to kill me, I was lying on the floor of his private clinic with one hand over my unborn child and the other wrapped around a flash drive he believed was already destroyed. Behind the locked door, Dr. John Mercer was shouting my name. To the rest of Boston, John was a miracle worker. He was the handsome surgeon who appeared on morning television, donated to children's hospitals, and smiled beside grateful families in magazine photographs. To me, he was the man who had spent 12 years teaching me that love meant keeping his secrets. That night, I finally learned what those secrets had cost. My name is Claire Mercer. I was 41 years old, a surgical nurse, and 17 weeks pregnant when my marriage ended in blood sirens and a lie that almost worked. But to explain how I ended up on that floor, I need to go back 3 weeks. It began with a dead woman's voicemail. I was working the evening shift at St. Catherine's Medical Center when my phone vibrated inside my locker. The message came from a number I did not recognize. I nearly deleted it because the recording was only 6 seconds long. Then I heard a frightened woman whisper, "Claire, ask John what happened to patient 47. There was a sharp sound in the background. The message ended. I listened again. The woman sounded weak and short of breath. I could not identify her voice, but she knew my name. More important, she knew John. I called the number. It had been disconnected. At home that night, John was standing in our kitchen, slicing lemons for sparkling water. He looked exactly as he always did after surgery. Calm, clean, and completely in control. I asked him about patient 47. For half a second, his knife stopped moving. Then he laughed. "Is that a room number?" he asked. "I don't know." Then, how would I know? He kissed my forehead and placed his palm against my stomach. We had spent 5 years trying to have a baby. 2 miscarriages had nearly broken me. This pregnancy felt like a light returning to a house after a long winter. John called the baby our miracle. That night, however, his hand on my stomach did not comfort me. It felt like a warning. I told myself I was being foolish. Pregnancy had made me tired. Hospital work had made me suspicious. A strange voicemail did not prove anything. The next morning, I searched the patient database at St. Catherine's. John performed most of his surgeries there, but no current patient was identified as 47. I checked room assignments, case numbers, and surgery schedules. Nothing matched. Then I searched the archived files from John's private clinic, Mercer Regenerative Institute. The clinic treated wealthy patients with experimental procedures for nerve damage and chronic pain. John described the work as the future of medicine. I had helped him start the clinic 7 years earlier. I used my inheritance from my mother to pay the first year's rent. One old folder contained numbered research participants. Patient 47 was Alina Ruiz, 34 years old. Status deceased. My throat tightened. Elena had died 11 months earlier, officially from a sudden heart condition. I remembered her because she had written John a glowing letter after her first procedure. She had 2 daughters and worked as a high school librarian. I opened the surgical notes. The final report said the operation had been routine, but one medication entry had been changed. The original dose was faintly visible beneath the correction. Someone had tripled it. I printed the page and folded it into my purse. When I turned around, John's chief administrator, Rebecca Sloan, was standing in the doorway. Rebecca was elegant, silver-haired, and always dressed in dark green. She had worked for John for 6 years. People called her his second shadow because she knew his schedule better than he did. "Looking for something?" she asked. I said I was checking an old billing mistake. Her eyes moved to my purse. "Be careful with old files, Claire," she said. Sometimes the past is buried for a reason. That sentence followed me all day. At dinner, John asked whether I had visited the clinic. I had not told him I was going there. Rebecca saw you, he explained. His voice was friendly, but his eyes were cold. I asked why Elena's medication record had been changed. John set down his fork. You accessed a confidential research file without authorization. I'm your wife. That doesn't make you my investigator. It was the first time in 12 years that he spoke to me like a stranger. Then he softened. That was John's gift. He could turn cruelty into concern before you had time to defend yourself. He came around the table and knelt beside me. He said Elena had lied about taking another medication. He said her family had threatened a lawsuit. He said the clinic corrected the dose during the review because a nurse had entered it incorrectly. Medicine is complicated, he whispered. Stress is bad for the baby. Let me protect you from this. I wanted to believe him, so I nodded. That night, while John slept, I checked my purse. The printed record was gone. In its place was a note written in John's handwriting. It said, "Trust your husband." That was when fear entered my marriage. Not because he had taken the paper. Because he wanted me to know he had taken it. Part TWO. Team. Mochdas meep the next morning, I began lying to my husband. I smiled when he made coffee. I kissed him before work. I apologized for questioning him and blamed my behavior on pregnancy hormones. John accepted the apology immediately. Powerful men often confuse obedience with innocence. At the hospital, I called Elena Ruse's sister, Sophia. I found her number in an old emergency contact form. Sophia refused to speak at first. Then I mentioned the voicemail. There was a long silence. My sister left messages for 3 people before she died. Sophia said, "You were one of them." We met that afternoon in a crowded coffee shop near Boston Common. Sophia arrived carrying a red folder against her chest. She told me Elena's pain had improved after her first treatment. After the third, Elena developed bruising, dizziness, and memory problems. John insisted those symptoms were normal. When Elena asked to leave the study, the clinic threatened to charge her more than $200,000 for procedures that had originally been described as sponsored research. 2 days before her death, Elena told Sophia she had found evidence that John was using patients to test an unapproved drug. Then Elena died. The medical examiner called it natural. The clinic called it tragic. John attended the funeral and paid for the flowers. Sophia opened the red folder. Inside were photographs of Elena's bruises, copies of emails, and a list of 6 patients. 3 were dead. 2 had disappeared from public records. The final name was Marissa Cole. Marissa was alive. She lived in a small town in New Hampshire and had refused every request to speak with Sophia. I understood why. John had money, lawyers, and a reputation that made people doubt their own eyes. Before we parted, Sophia gripped my wrist. "If you confront him, he will make you look unstable," she said. That is what he did to Elena. I promised I would be careful. I was not careful enough. When I returned to my car, the driver's door was open. Nothing appeared stolen. My purse was where I had left it. My hospital badge remained in the cup holder, but the red folder was gone. On the passenger seat lay a small white baby sock. I had never seen it before. My hands shook so badly that I dropped my keys. I called John and told him someone had broken into my car. He arrived in 12 minutes, faster than the police. He wrapped his coat around my shoulders and told the officer I was pregnant, exhausted, and probably mistaken about locking the door. Then, he picked up the baby sock. "This is ours," he said. It was not ours. He smiled at the officer. "We've been buying so many things." The officer wrote a short report and left. On the drive home, John kept one hand on the wheel and the other on my knee. "You should take leave from the hospital," he said. I told him I did not need leave. His fingers tightened. I wasn't asking. That evening, I discovered that a letter had already been sent to the hospital's Human Resources Department. It was written on John's medical stationery and signed with my obstetrician's name. It claimed I was experiencing confusion, severe anxiety, and possible delusions. My leave had been approved. I called my obstetrician, Dr. Helen Park. She had not written the letter. When I sent her a photograph, she became very quiet. "Claire, this is a forged signature," she said. I asked her not to report it yet. She objected, but I explained that I needed time to understand what John was doing. Helen had been my friend since nursing school. She knew how hard we had fought for this pregnancy. Finally, she agreed to give me 48 hours. Before hanging up, she said, "Do not eat or drink anything he gives you." I slept in the guest room and locked the door. At 3 a.m, I woke to the sound of the handle turning. John stood outside for almost a minute. He did not knock. He simply tested the lock again and again. In the morning, he acted as though nothing had happened. I told him I was driving to my sister's house in Connecticut. I did not have a sister. John knew that, but he only smiled. "Of course," he said. "A change of scenery will help." I drove north instead. Marissa Cole lived outside Concord in a weathered blue house surrounded by pine trees. I parked 2 streets away and walked through light rain. When she opened the door, she looked at my stomach and immediately tried to close it. I put my foot against the frame. "I'm John Mercer's wife," I said, "and I think he is going to hurt me." Marissa let me inside. She had once been a marathon runner. Now she walked with a cane. Purple marks covered one side of her neck. She told me John's treatment had caused internal bleeding and permanent nerve damage. When she threatened to report him, he produced documents showing that she had consented to every risk. Her signature was on every page. She had signed none of them. Then she told me something worse. The experimental drug was not John's real business. The injuries were not unfortunate side effects. John was using carefully controlled overdoses to create medical emergencies. He would rescue wealthy patients in front of their families, then recommend expensive follow-up surgeries, private nursing, and long-term treatment. He was not merely testing a dangerous drug. He was manufacturing miracles. Marissa survived because a young clinic nurse changed the dosage at the last moment. That nurse vanished from Boston 1 week later. Her name was Lily Chen, Marissa said. "If you find her, you find the truth." I knew Lily. She had worked beside me when the clinic opened, and according to John, Lily had stolen narcotics and fled the country. Marissa looked toward the window. A black SUV had stopped across the road. The driver did not get out. My phone rang. It was John. "How is your sister?" he asked. I could hear rain striking his windshield. T-chi, P-R-O-F-I-E-N-C. M-O-C. I left Marissa's house through the back door. She led me down a muddy path to an abandoned greenhouse. From there, I crossed into a neighbor's yard and called a taxi. My car remained parked 2 streets away. John's SUV followed it when a tow truck carried it south an hour later. For the first time, I understood that I was not investigating my husband. I was running from him. Dr. Helen Park met me at a motel outside Manchester. She brought clean clothes, prenatal vitamins, cash, and a second phone. When she saw the fear on my face, she stopped asking me to go directly to the police. Police reports need evidence. John knew judges, hospital executives, and 2 members of the governor's health council. If he painted me as a confused pregnant wife, before I could prove anything, he could place me under observation and control who reached me. We needed the records from his clinic. Helen also had news. She had examined the forged medical letter. The document metadata showed it had been created on a computer, registered to Mercer Regenerative Institute. That was fraud. It was not enough to prove murder. But it was a beginning. I spent the night searching for Lily Chen. Her professional licenses had expired. Her social accounts were deleted. Her parents had moved from Massachusetts. At dawn, I found an old wedding announcement for Lily's cousin. One photograph showed Lily standing beside a woman named Grace Wu, who owned a bakery in Providence. I called the bakery when it opened. Grace denied knowing where Lily was. I told her about Elena, Marissa, and the forged letter. Then I told her I was pregnant. An hour later, Grace sent me an address in rural Maine. Lily answered the door of a lakeside cabin, holding a hunting rifle. She lowered it when she recognized me. She looked older than I remembered, though only 6 years had passed. Her hair was cut short, and a pale scar crossed her eyebrow. "I wondered when you would come," she said. Inside, Lily showed me a metal box filled with copies of clinic records. She had kept them as insurance. They documented changed doses, forged signatures, and payments routed through a company called North Star Patient Services. North Star collected money from patients' families and sent part of it to an offshore account. The account belonged to Rebecca Sloan. I had assumed Rebecca protected John because she was loyal. The records showed she was his partner. Lily had confronted them after Marissa's procedure. Rebecca attacked her in the clinic parking garage while John watched. They threatened Lily's parents and planted stolen medication in her apartment. Lily escaped before the police arrived. "Why didn't you expose him?" I asked. Her answer was simple. "Because I was afraid." I could not judge her. I had lived beside the same man for 12 years and called my silence love. Lily copied the records onto a flash drive. Before giving it to me, she opened one final folder. It contained life insurance policies. John had insured several research patients through North Star without their knowledge. Elena's death had paid more than $3 million. Then I saw my own name. John had taken out a $5 million policy on me 8 months earlier. The beneficiary was a trust controlled by the clinic. My pregnancy had been confirmed 4 months later. Suddenly, details I had ignored became clear. The tea John insisted I drink before bed. The dizziness I blamed on pregnancy. The bruises that appeared on my arms and back. The 2 earlier miscarriages that John said were cruel accidents. I could barely breathe. Lily touched my shoulder. "Claire, did John manage your fertility medication?" I nodded. She closed her eyes. Inside the records was an order for a drug that could cause pregnancy loss. John had prescribed it under a false patient name. The delivery dates matched the weeks before both of my miscarriages. The room seemed to tilt. For 5 years, I had blamed my body. I had apologized to John for failing him. He had held me while I cried over 2 children he may have taken from me. Something inside me changed in that cabin. Fear did not disappear. It hardened. I no longer wanted only to escape. I wanted John to stand in a room full of people who admired him and watch every lie collapse. Lily begged me to take the evidence directly to federal investigators. I agreed, but there was a problem. Her copies showed what happened to other patients. They did not prove John had personally ordered the altered doses. The original authorization logs were stored on an offline server inside the clinic. I knew where it was. Every year, John hosted the Mercer Foundation Gala at a downtown hotel. Hundreds of donors, doctors, reporters, and public officials attended. This year's gala was 2 nights away. John would be onstage. Rebecca would supervise the event. The clinic would be nearly empty. It was our only opening. Helen contacted Special Agent Maya Torres, a federal investigator who had handled health care fraud. Maya listened to us in a private office in Portland. She believed enough to begin. But she warned that evidence taken illegally could create problems. She wanted a warrant. A warrant required time. I did not have time. That afternoon, John released a statement claiming I had suffered a mental health crisis and disappeared while pregnant. My photograph appeared on local news. He stood outside our home and begged me to return. "Claire," he told the cameras, "you and our baby are everything to me." Then the reporter announced that police had found stolen narcotics in my hospital locker. John was using Lily's old trap again. Agent Torres told me to remain hidden. I told her John would keep destroying evidence. She said, "If you go into that clinic, I cannot promise I can protect you." I looked at my name on the life insurance policy. "I've been waiting 12 years for someone to protect me," I said. "I'm done waiting. Per fo your. Tiechi, tear up." On the night of the gala, Boston glittered beneath a cold rain. John's face filled the digital screens outside the hotel. The words beneath it read, "He alu. Tiara yui agi." I almost laughed. Lily entered the clinic first, using an old service badge that still worked. Helen waited in a car across the street with Agent Torres, listening through my phone. I wore a dark coat, a wig, and a pair of glasses. My stomach was still easy to hide. The clinic lobby was empty. The lights had been lowered, leaving the glass hallways full of reflections. Lily disabled the interior cameras from the nursing station. I went to John's office and opened the hidden panel behind his framed medical degree. The server room required a 6-digit code. John used the date we first met for almost everything. The door opened. Inside, rows of blue lights blinked in the darkness. I connected Lily's drive and began copying the authorization logs. 20%, 42, 68. Then the hallway lights turned on. Rebecca stood outside the glass wall. She was wearing the same green suit she had worn in dozens of clinic photographs. In one hand, she held Lily's disabled camera tablet. In the other, she held a syringe. "John said you would come here," she said through the intercom. The server door locked behind me. Rebecca entered a code. Air began to hiss from a vent near the ceiling. The room was designed with a fire suppression system that removed oxygen without damaging equipment. If she activated it fully, I would lose consciousness within minutes. The copy reached 79%. Rebecca watched me through the glass. She said John had always underestimated my intelligence, but overestimated my courage. He believed the pregnancy would make me obedient. "Where is Lily?" I asked. Rebecca smiled. "She ran the first time. She'll run again?" My phone lost its signal inside the server room. I could not reach Helen or Torres. 86%. My vision blurred. I removed my scarf, wrapped it around my fist, and struck the emergency alarm. The cover cracked, but the button did not move. Rebecca lifted the syringe. "When they find you, the drugs in your blood will explain everything," she said. A frightened, unstable nurse broke into the clinic and overdosed. 93%. I struck the alarm again. The glass cut through the scarf and opened my palm. 97. The room spun. Then every light in the clinic went dark. Lily had reached the electrical panel. The lock released. I fell through the door as the backup power started. Rebecca rushed toward me with the syringe, but Lily struck her arm with a metal fire extinguisher. The syringe slid across the floor. Rebecca screamed for security. Lily pulled me toward the stairwell. I still had the flash drive. We reached the lobby and found the exit chained from the outside. John had never gone to the gala. He stepped from the shadows wearing his white surgical coat. 2 private security guards stood behind him. "Give me the drive," he said. I asked him about our miscarriages. For once, John did not pretend to misunderstand. He said the first pregnancy had come at a dangerous time for his research. The second would have made me less useful at the clinic. He described our lost children as scheduling problems. Lily's fingers closed around my arm, keeping me upright. I wanted to scream. Instead, I asked why he had allowed the current pregnancy. John's face changed. I didn't, he said. He had increased the drug in my tea. But I stopped drinking it after Helen warned me. Now my pregnancy made my death more valuable. A grieving city would donate millions to the foundation named after me and my unborn child. He was going to turn our murder into a fundraising campaign. John held out his hand. The drive, Claire. I placed it on the floor and crushed it beneath my shoe. His calm expression vanished. He crossed the lobby and hit me so hard that I fell against an examination cart. Pain spread across my back. I covered my stomach. Lily tried to reach me, but one guard held her. John grabbed my hair and dragged me toward the procedure room. Rebecca followed, clutching her injured wrist. He said he could still make the scene believable. He would inject me, damage the clinic, and blame Lily. Rebecca would testify that we had attacked her. I looked at the crushed drive near the door. Then I began to laugh. John stopped. What is funny? You still think that was the only copy? Lily had designed the transfer to send every file to Agent Torres as it downloaded. The drive was theater. More important, my phone had reconnected when I left the server room. John's confession had been transmitted live. He stared at my coat pocket. I heard sirens outside. Rebecca ran first. She pushed past the guards and tried to reach a side door. Lily pulled a fire alarm. Red lights flashed across the lobby. John dragged me into the procedure room and locked the door. That was how I ended up on the floor, with one hand over my unborn child. The bruises across my back were not from a mysterious illness. They came from the examination cart and from John's hands as he tried to force me onto the table. Outside, police shouted for him to open the door. John stood above me with a syringe. He said he loved me. I told him love did not poison babies. He moved toward me. The door burst open. 2 officers pulled John away while he screamed that I had ruined everything. Helen ran to me. She held my head against her green jacket as paramedics checked the baby's heartbeat. It was fast, but it was there, strong and steady beneath the noise. John kept shouting as the officers dragged him past us. For the first time in 12 years, no one was listening to him. Part 5e. The Ravenji Inavr, expetada surviving was only the beginning. John had spent years building walls around himself. Lawyers questioned the legality of the clinic recording. Hospital officials claimed they had never seen warning signs. Wealthy patients feared public embarrassment. Rebecca refused to speak. For 2 months, John remained free on bail. He appeared at every hearing in an expensive suit and smiled at the cameras. His attorneys described me as a jealous wife who had invented a conspiracy to gain control of the clinic. They said pregnancy had made me irrational. Then they released portions of my private therapy records from after my miscarriages. The public began to divide. Some people believed me. Others sent letters calling me a liar. Online strangers said I had injured myself. Commentators asked why I had stayed with John if he was dangerous. That question hurt more than I expected. I stayed because danger does not always announce itself with a raised fist. Sometimes it arrives with flowers, apologies, and a hand on your shoulder. Sometimes it changes your memory one small piece at a time, until you no longer trust your own fear. But I was not alone anymore. Marissa agreed to testify. Sophia brought Alina's original voicemail records. Lily came out of hiding. Dr. Park proved her signature had been forged. Agent Torres traced Northstar's money through 4 states and 3 countries. Still, Rebecca remained the key. She had approved payments, altered files, and stood beside John at every crime. Without her cooperation, his attorneys could blame her for the worst decisions. So I gave Rebecca something John never had: the truth. From the evidence, Torres discovered that John had created a second offshore account. For years, he had been moving money away from Rebecca. He planned to blame the entire operation on her and leave the United States with a new identity. Rebecca believed she was his partner. In his private notes, John called her the final liability. I asked Agent Torres for permission to meet Rebecca at the county detention center. She agreed, with investigators watching through the glass. Rebecca entered wearing a gray uniform. Without the green suits and gold jewelry, she looked smaller. But I remembered the syringe in her hand, and I felt no pity. I slid a copy of John's notes across the table. She read the words twice. "He wrote this after Alina died," I said. "You protected him for 6 years. He planned to give you 6 months before you became his next patient." Rebecca's face went still. She asked what I wanted. "Every name," I said. "Every patient. Every payment. And I want you to tell the truth in open court." She asked what I would give her in return. Nothing. That was my revenge against Rebecca. I did not threaten her. I did not bargain with her. I let her understand that the man she had helped protect had already sentenced her. 3 days later, she accepted a cooperation agreement. The case changed overnight. Rebecca provided backup drives, financial ledgers, and recordings she had secretly made to protect herself. One recording captured John ordering Elena's fatal dose. Another captured him discussing the drugs he had given me. There were 14 victims. 5 had died. The others lived with permanent injuries, debt, and years of doubt. John was arrested again, this time without bail. His medical license was suspended. St. Catherine's removed his name from the surgical wing. The Mercer Foundation's board dissolved the organization and transferred its remaining money into a victim compensation fund. But John still believed he could win. At trial, he watched me every day. By then, my daughter was 6 weeks old. I named her Hope Alina Mercer. Hope for what survived, and Alina for the woman whose final message saved us. When I entered the courtroom, I carried no photographs of my bruises. The jury had already seen them. I carried a small white baby sock. It was the one John had left in my car as a threat. On the witness stand, I told the story from the beginning. I spoke slowly. I did not exaggerate. I did not look at John until the prosecutor asked whether I could identify the man who forged my medical records and drugged me during pregnancy. Then I turned toward him. "Yes," I said. "He is the man who taught me to doubt myself. And he is the reason I never will again." John's attorney tried to break me during cross-examination. He asked why I had copied confidential records, why I had lied to my husband, why I had entered the clinic in disguise. I answered every question. Then he held up the baby's sock and suggested I had planted it for sympathy. That was his mistake. The prosecutor had tested the sock. A small blood stain inside it contained John's DNA from a cut on his hand. Security video from a store showed Rebecca buying the package the morning my car was opened. The threat linked both of them to the intimidation campaign. Rebecca testified the next day. She described the fraud, the altered doses, and John's plan to kill me. She did not ask for forgiveness. No one offered it. Lily testified after her. Her voice trembled for the first minute. Then she looked at Marissa in the gallery and grew stronger. Sophia played Elena's final voicemail. The courtroom became completely silent. "Claire, ask John what happened to patient 47. 6 seconds. That was all Elena had needed to open the first crack in John's perfect life. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. John was convicted of murder, attempted murder, fraud, witness intimidation, and multiple federal health care crimes. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus additional consecutive sentences. Rebecca received 28 years. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked whether I felt victorious. I looked down at Hope sleeping against my chest. Victory was not the word. Nothing could return Elena to her daughters. Nothing could erase Lily's years in hiding or restore Marissa's health. Nothing could bring back the two children whose lives ended before I understood what John had done. Justice is not a time machine. It is a locked door between a dangerous man and the people he can no longer hurt. 6 months later, I sold our house. Most of the money went to legal costs and the victim fund. I kept enough to rent a modest apartment near the ocean. I returned to nursing, but not to surgery. I began working with patients recovering from medical abuse and with families learning how to question powerful doctors. Lily renewed her nursing license. Marissa started a support group. Sophia brought her nieces to meet Hope on Elena's birthday. We sat together in a public garden beneath a row of flowering trees. The girls took turns holding the baby. For the first time, Sophia told them the full truth about their mother. She did not describe Elena as a victim. She described her as the woman who left one final light burning in the dark. When Hope was old enough to sleep through the night, I opened the box containing the pieces of my old life. Inside were wedding photographs, hospital badges, court papers, and the white baby sock. For a moment, I considered throwing everything away. Instead, I placed the sock in a frame beside Elena's 6-word message. Not because I wanted to remember John's threat. Because I wanted Hope to know what happened when her mother finally stopped being afraid. John believed power meant deciding who would suffer and who would be believed. He believed his title could erase the dead, his money could purchase silence, and his love could excuse cruelty. In the end, he lost his freedom, his fortune, his reputation, and even his name on the building he had worshipped. But my revenge was not that he lost everything. My revenge was that we lived. Hope lived. Lily lived. Marissa lived. Elena's truth lived. And every morning, when my daughter opened her eyes, the future John tried to erase began again. He wanted to make us disappear. Instead, we became the story no one could silence.